Hey there, and welcome to the next episode of Weapon Refine Ideas. Wow, I can't believe it. Distant counter weapon refines, here at last. Many have speculated whether these weapons will ever receive refines. But here we are, the first half of them. I think the second half, which all originate in Book 2, I believe. Dorcas is a bit of grey area, but I think they want to balance doing half the weapons now and half next time. So, here in the first half, we have majoritively sword units, and all units that I've covered in my previous Distant Counter Refine speculation video. But this time it's going to be a little different. The refines are a little bit more realistic, and I've edited a few of the builds to be a bit more relevant to the times. I've also updated the grid that shows which characters are existing for refines and which ones have now got their refines. So, without further ado, let's get into this. So last time I had a look at distant counter weapon users, I used these grids, and all these are for to give a perspective on how many units or what units we're still looking at in terms of refines. It's especially interesting with Book 1, seeing which ones they're going to leave till last. You know, we've still got Dancers, we've still got the Dire Thunder duo, and there's still a bunch of healers without any prefs to differentiate themselves. So it really is a case of concept of elimination, process of elimination. And Book 2, we still have a lot of units left, so I was thinking, well, maybe they'll try and get through some Book 2 units first, right? And then do DC units when all the Book 2 units like Sumiya, who didn't have a pref, will be done first. Well, as you go to the next slide here, you'll see that actually we've wiped off a bunch of Book 1 units by making this move. And I think the idea was just that they wanted to wait as long as they could with DC refines, but they've come to a point now where they might as well just do them anyway, get them over with, and then they can start to rub off the Book 1 mark, because by this point, most Book 1 units especially should have refines by now. Especially characters like Azura and regular Olwyn, I think, and Base Hector, although I think Base Hector got access to the different version of Armads, which is why they've left it. But yeah, there's a lot to be said about weapon refines, and it's just really cool to see distant counter weapons get something, quite frankly. I'm excited to see if they'll do the second batch of DC refines straight away, or whether they'll save those two a little later. I'm personally excited for the Greemers. I really like the Greemer characters, they're my favourite. But as for the ones today, we're going to start off with the Gradivus users, Camus and Hardin. So here are Camus and Hardin at base. As you can see, they have relatively underwhelming skill fodder. Apart from Hardin, actually, Bold Fighter is still a relevant skill, almost as a budget option nowadays for any army unit if you just want to make them good at something. You know, if they got a meaty attack stat and not much else, then give them Bold Fighter and they'll be fine, as long as you've got some assistance with movement, like Armor March, to help them along. Bold Fighter's still a very good skill. As for Camus, Grani's shield has never really been very relevant, because Cavalry Slayers have never really been that much of an issue, even if they are relevant in the meta, because most cavalry units attack on player phase, and most cavalry killers are also player phase with no bulk, so slaying them isn't really an issue. You wouldn't go out of your way to tank a horse killer with a horse, right? So it's never really been too relevant. Goad cavalry's okay, but again, cavalry units prefer player phase. It's also another reason why distant counter's never really been too amazing of an option for a cavalry unit. Hence why Camus never been too relevant. All of that hensing aside, Hardin's the very opposite. A distant counter weapon is incredibly useful for him as an army unit, because it frees up his A slot for other things. Nowadays you've got unity skills, you've got more than just steady breath, you've got unity skills, you've got higher TA skills like Fort Dev Res. There's a lot you can do, high level stance skills. There's a lot of things that can synergize with an army unit with distant counter in its weapon. So how do you possibly go about making a refine for both of these that work together? Well, first you need to find something they have in common. What they have in common is a need for speed and res. If you're going to make Camus into a tank, you're going to want more speed and more resistance. If you're going to make Hardin into a tank, he needs more speed anyway. And because his defense is higher than his res, it's handy for him to have something res boosting. So while these two differ in their builds, the concept is the same. To be able to tank on enemy phase effectively with enough speed that you can counter from any distance and maintain consistent doubles and all-around bulk. I mean, this is, true for any enemy phase character, of course, but it's interesting how both of these characters could use very similar stat boosting opportunities to essentially do the same job. It's just Camus has 3 movement. Now, the solo skill allows Camus to have a sort of player phase presence as well. It's just Swift Stance really does solidify those doubles for you, and the guard effect really does protect him. As for Hardin, he's protected by the Unity and Special Fighter effect, so once again you can see how much more naturally an army unit fits the defensive role. And then I have a second build here. This is a player phase Camus that uses Flowing Lance, one of the best weapons in the game. Flowing Lance, Unbound Blade, and Dex Swabber are all incredibly good weapons because just by being by yourself you can lower the attack and defense of your opponent, allowing you to work very independently. Now, independent is a cavalry unit's middle name, so having all these solo skills is really handy on top of this, just to grant him a ton of stats, enabling him to be a relevant player phase unit. The problem is that most other cav units can do this just as well. As for Hardin, I gave him the traditional Slaying Lance, Distant Counter Ether Special Fighter set, which he can only really run at high merges because of the speed ceiling. It's less and less good nowadays, of course. Speed ceilings keep going higher, but he does have a ton of bulk. One thing when I was making this video that crossed my mind was also the fact that you could do a near or fast save build. Since Hardin has very mixed bulk, he could fit either of those roles really well, especially with a distant counter weapon. So yeah, that's those two. For their refine, I decided to go with a new format this time around with the refines themselves, where I'm not going to change the base effect, but I'm going to allow 2 skills for the refine of the weapon. So distant counter will be the base effects of these weapons, and I predict that they will get 2 simple effects as their refine that they get on top. So something that benefits both of these units will be lull attack speed. You may have seen it on one of Camus' builds. This gives you a boost in your bulk all around and some speed, ideal for both of them. It also enables Camus to work on both phases, of course, because it's always active. Another thing I gave them both was Speed Res Unity, which is a skill that converts penalties into bonuses. Again, perfect for tanks, but also can potentially function on player phase, which means that both these characters can technically be multi-phase units. For example, if you have a flyer with guidance, you could airdrop Hardin in to go and destroy stuff, and then on the next turn he'd still be ready to tank things coming his way. Camus can go in on his own with lull attack speed anyway, and if someone comes up behind him in the enemy phase, he'll have that unity skill to help defend as well. So all around, these 2 units have a lot of potential. They just need a bit extra speed res and maybe some extra bulk in other ways. Just something like this would help them operate in what they were intended to be, but at a much higher level and much more in line with what we have nowadays. Next up we have the Ryomas. Now at base, these guys have a rather odd stat line for a distant counter user. Both of them have very low res, and even the skills they come with emphasize a very offensive presence. Apart from Kestrel Stance, which is quite an awkward skill in the first place. Usually attack speed is more of a player phase option that you use on your own turn to go in and attack stuff. And especially as a flyer, much like a cavalry unit, you tend to prefer using your movement on your own turn to maneuver around opponents and allies and have a rather offensive presence on the battlefield, not a defensive one. Now, Legendary Ryomas had an upgrade recently to have attack speed rain at base, which is really, really useful, but also improving Bushido to not only have IoT shield, but plus 7 damage just because no condition whatsoever. And also the close call spurn repel effect, which is a speed damage reduction effect, which is exactly what I wanted him to have in my previous video. I said, look, he needs spurn or some kind of speed-related damage reduction, and they did it, which is really cool. I doubt they saw my video, but it's an idea. Now, as for their builds, originally I went with something that helped Legendary Ryoma to be more offensive, like a fire sweep sword, but this time I decided to go with what they gave him for his Bushido and work off of that as a distant counter user. So normal Ryoma's builds remain the same, boosting speed and res and attack in order to be effective on both phases, and enable himself to tank mages, because they will be a big problem if you don't fix his resistance. And as for Legendary Ryoma, he can now do exactly the same. He doesn't have to worry about archers anymore. He can just increase his damage output, make sure his speed's high enough to utilize that speed reduction. And the solo allows him to make good use of his movement and run around and be offensive at the same time. So a mixed phase duelist fits both of these characters, and you'll see that as a recurring theme through the video anyway, since, well, all these characters share a very similar role in being a distant counter weapon user, so, you know, I just wanted to give them something that can go with that. Now for the second build, I gave Legendary Ryoma an Unbound Blade, because this synergizes really well with the updated Bushido skill. So alongside attack speed Rhine, you're doing -9 attack, and then -5 def, and -4 speed on the opponent. And then Speed Res Solo allows you to boost your speed even more, boost your bulk even more. It all just works together to be quite an offensive defender who can run in on his own and do perfectly fine against most enemies in the entire game. Again, Unbound Blades, Flowing Lance, these type of weapons that deal -5 attack def are just really useful for any unit that you're struggling to make useful and good. Just make them on their own and they'll be fine. And then as for a normal Ryoma over there, I gave him yet another speed related damage reduction build that helps him be good on both phases, and just an overall pain to deal with. Ether keeps him healthy, Spurn keeps him healthier on the way to charging Ether, so it all works together quite nicely. And Joint Drive Attack for a little extra damage alongside Flashing Blade 4, because both Ryomas aren't lacking in attack, but if you're focusing on other things like Spurn and the solo skill with speed and res, you're not actually boosting your attack very much. And that leads on to what I gave them for their Refine. Once again, following that pattern of not changing the base effect, I gave them cooldown -1, and then attack speed unity. And all this is to do is to help you charge any specials you want to get off, because I realized that Bushido 2 fixes most of the problems Legendary Ryoma had anyway. So I gave them both a weapon that helps them even more with any build you decide to do. And attack speed +5 is really handy alongside the resistance to any penalties the opponent might try to put on you, which only makes speed reduction skills or speed damage reduction skills more effective. It protects them in their offenses, which is what you want, you know. You want to kind of remove all options the opponent has to reduce your attack and speed, so that you just go in and destroy them and they don't really have a chance to react. You know, Legendary Azura dances this guy for 3 movement. He's going to do a lot of damage. So, yeah, there's a lot you can do with this Refine. But this is what I'm hoping they do, because it would just be nice to see them get cooldown -1 for those Ether procs, and the attack speed +5. Attack speed unity will always be welcomed. And it frees up the A slot for yet another thing on top of distant counter and a unity skill built in. So, goodness, there is a lot you can do with Ryoma if you play your cards right. Next up we have the Ikes. Now, these are the hardest ones to come up with a consistent Refine for, because while their roles are essentially the same, their kit that they come with is quite difficult to sync up, because while both of them are units that focus on proccing Ether as soon as possible with special cooldown increasing, Radiant Ike has Radiant Ether 2, which gives you a quicken pulse effect, but also has a 4 cooldown at base anyway. And regular Ike doesn't have either of those things. He has a 5 cooldown Ether special with no quicken pulse. So I can't really do quicken pulse as a refine because it wouldn't really do much for legendary Ike, even if it helps base Ike. And I can't really do cooldown -1 because then Radiant Ether becomes a 3 cooldown, which is a little awkward to work with when he already comes with a breath skill in the A slot. So, as far as fodder goes, Warding Breath's outdated, but it's still rather good. It's not a bad skill. And regular Ether can be inherited, so that's always a nice thing to have. That's it for fodder, really. Everything else is worth skimming over at best. There's not much there that's worth getting rid of these guys for. The first build I went with, and only build this time, I decided to ditch the Carrot Cudgel build because Ragnar is still a very good weapon to use. And there are skills in the game now that can really support this playstyle, especially since it's getting a refine. So I decided to design the build around Ragnar and each of their respective ethers. So regular Ike has an attack res unity to protect his bulk, protect his attack. Low attack speed helps him double more consistently. Joint drive speed helps him to double as well, also helps his allies. And then heavy blade in the seal slot to speed up the ether proc. Very simple build, and the dragon flowers go a long way to help his speed. There's a lot of ways you could build Ike here. You can even use unbound blade with distant counter if you really wanted to, but passing up on a unity skill's never always too wise when you've got distant counter in the weapon already. Legendary Ike's a lot easier. Warding Breath special spiral means that after you proc ether, it'll go back down to 2 charge again, and right from the start of the match, you've got an instant proc ether at your disposal. Now with speed, you can have natural doubles. If you're unmerged, you may instead want to stick with attack or def plus or res plus, and go with quick riposte in the sacred seal slot, and you get pretty much the same results. You'll just get hit more often, and probably die more easily to mages. For their refine, this is where it was tricky because I wanted to find something that works for both of them. So what I did was I gave them special spiral inherently because they can both benefit from this. Regular Ike would need to have he could run double special spiral, you see, with this. So he'll get 1 cooldown after proccing ether, which he doesn't need a breath effect for then. He'll just instantly proc it. And then after combat, he'll get back down to 1 again. So even just that little combo is already enough. And as for Legendary Ike, this frees up his B slot to be something different, like Spurn, which will boost his special damage and reduce the damage he takes if his speed's high enough. It's not really high enough, but you get the idea. There's a lot of different skills. You could do Vantage if you really wanted to. You could do Lull Attack Speed. That would be a really good option. There's a lot you can do here. And that's not counting the secondary effect, which is Joint Drive Spectrum. I just thought it would be nice, he fights for his friends, that he'd have something that helps his allies, but also helps himself. He gains strength from his allies in all stats. +4 to all stats isn't abnormal nowadays. I was tempted to give him another skill on top of this, but for the sake of balance, I thought, well, he's got Radiant Ether 2, and he comes with a Joint Drive. He has got a lot now, and you can always use different skills if you really want to, but this is just an idea. It helps his bulk, helps his speed, helps his attack. Something along these lines would be really nice to see for Ike. As the only character that does not share a weapon in this batch, Xander's one of the easiest to come up with a refine for. At base he comes with basically nothing besides his breath and blazing light, which is quite good actually. Most people use blazing wind because it's a more enclosed space, and most teams that you'll face will be clumped together rather than spread out in a very specific pattern. But, it's still a good skill, and other than this, Xander struggles quite a lot with his speed and his res. Much like Camus, he doesn't really have a stat line that works with distant counter, nor does he have a movement type that works well with distant counter. So in order to make use of him, I gave him... This is a very high investment build that focuses on being on enemy phase, not really worrying about your movement. of 3 squares, but just chilling out, staying still, soaking attack and res ploys and turning them into bonuses for yourself. Low attack def boosts your bulk and your damage, and the idea is just to tank something, take the hit, and hit them back twice as hard. It's very simple, and there isn't much else you can do with Xander at this point that other characters can't just do better. I mean, you may as well have merged up a 3-4 star Ares at 5 star with his special spiral slaying sword, and he came out ages ago, so you've probably got a few copies of him now. And as for his other build, this is more of a meme build, but Ninja Katana is a really fun weapon on any character that's lacking, much like Unbound Blade. But this suits a cavalry's player phase, and while he doesn't have a lot of attack points, these 2 solo skills will really drive up his attack, as well as the drive attack joint drive skill. And what you want to do is run in, Gale Force, attack someone else, or run out. It's a simple Gale Force build. His lower attack stat does help him, because with Gale Force you don't want to kill on the first hit, because in order to proc Gale Force you need to hit them twice. And if he's doing small numbers, then hitting 4 times will be even better, and that should surely charge Gale Force. So you go in, hit them twice, get hit back, hit twice again. You're in desperation range, you can go off and kill someone else, or you can retreat. He's got plenty of HP, so even with low res he should be able to take a hit from a dragon in the process of this. He's actually got a lot of speed to work with in this exact case, but on low merges you probably can't pull this off very easily. The Ninja Katana's 4 extra speed really goes to help. But yeah, without a refine, Xander's more or less useless. He's very good at being a specific defense tank, but other than that, there's not much else to say about what he can do. So for his refine, what I did was I gave him an effect that grants special cooldown every time he attacks. This is really useful to proc Gale Force. Most cavalry units like to run Heavy Blade because, well, Gale Force is the one thing cavalry units do really well. So giving him this built into his weapon frees up his Sacred Seal slot to be a solo skill that will help his bulk, his damage, his speed, anything. So that's really useful. It's got a HP threshold, but it's very generous, so, you know, it's just very useful. And then the secondary effect, I gave him something similar. I was inspired by Henry's Refine, where if he has a lower stat than someone else, he gets a bonus. So in this case, because his speed's so low, I went with, if his speed is lower than the opponent's, he makes a guaranteed follow attack, and the foe cannot. Half inspired by Rid, the Ice Prince guy. And this is to do with Xander's strong personality, I suppose, imposing, you know, he's going to make a follow-up and not them, you know, he's not going to let you. And the speed check's really easy, his HP threshold's really easy, and the follow-up attack will really help with mixed phase dueling, Gale Force builds, anything of the sort. So it'll be nice to see what they give him, but I think the most important thing would be a guaranteed follow-up attack. And blocking the opponent's follow-up attack will be even better. So, you know, there's a lot of potential for Xander. They just have to see what his stat line is capable of and the sorts of playstyles that cavalry units want, and not make it too specific either with the conditions. I don't like refines that have, if you're in space of a cavalry or infantry or a mage or something, that's always so restrictive. But things like HP above 25% or lower speed than the opponent, that's a lot easier. So something like this would be really nice. Last but certainly not least is the Black Knight and Zelgius. These units are really similar in both stat spread, playstyle, and what they come with. They both come with distant counter, of course, in their weapon. They both have Black Luna. They both have a stance skill. They both have a teleportation type B skill. And then as Zelgius is on a banner, he gets the addition of a third slot filled. In this case, it is Panic Ploy. His HP isn't the best for Panic Ploy, but it's still good. Panic Ploy is a good fodder even today, though usually if you're looking to panic, you'd use Sudden Panic, or you'd use Iago, Aversa, or even cheaper Virion to do that sort of stuff. Warp powder's nice, but it's not particularly amazing nowadays, especially with its very harsh HP threshold that you have to be in. So when building these guys, much like Ira, you want to focus on proccing your special, which is good on either phases. So distant counter is actually very welcome for this bunch. Both of these guys. So as far as building them is concerned, all the builds you see can be used on either. I'm not using warp powder, so literally both of these units can run these exact builds as each other. So you're going to get 4 builds, and all of them can be used by each of these guys. So the first one on the left is the Special Fighter set, very traditional, with attack res unity to protect your stats, joint drive speed to ensure you're doubling, and the solo skill to just give a bit more of a overall boost to your stats that need it most. The one on the right is the Wodao set. It's an individual set that doesn't have distant counter, but it means you're going to do quite a lot of damage. It's not really that consistent, but it's another option. Then there's the Slaying Edge set. This is one of my favourites. I don't use it myself because I only plus 10 Zelgius recently, and I haven't given him many skills at all in case he got a refine, and I'm glad because now he's getting one. But the Slaying Edge set means that with Special Fighter or a breath skill, you can instantly proc Black Luna on the spot, just being hit once, bam, they're dead. It's really useful. And then the unity skills, the drive skills, the solos, again, these are all buffing up the necessary stats, protecting them, and even helping allies in some cases with the drives. So overall, very good build. And then Ninja Katana with Bold Fighter is a fun build. Armored Strike, he can just run in, kill people for fun. If he had cooldown -1, he'd be proccing Black Luna twice per combat, but thankfully Black Luna's a 3 cooldown special. So this build is not really going to be as scary as it could be. But with the solo skills, he can run in and do a lot of damage on his own. He might be quite a surprise to face by certain people in Ether Race defenses or something. So another thing to consider. Their refine, though, is very simple, but it's devastating. I gave them cooldown -1 because with Special Fighter, that's instantly proccing Black Luna, and I think it just works really well. It also frees up their A slot from distant counter, of course, if you're using a slaying weapon. So, goodness. If this became a reality, I'd be very scared. The second effect is echoing Ira. Once again, you want to focus on proccing your special, so why not protect it? I gave them immunity to guard effects, and just to add salt to the wound, I'm preventing the opponent from granting themselves bonus special cooldown. So it's not guard, but then you realize Special Fighter is guard. So you're gaining bonus special cooldown from Special Fighter while stopping the opponents, and you are stopping the opponent from inflicting anything like that on yourself. So no matter what happens, especially if you give him a savior skill, do you see where I'm going with this? If you gave him a save skill with this, they'd be forced to tank a Black Luna if they don't kill him in one shot. So, this is very simple but strong, and I really hope this is what he gets, actually, because this would be so fun to use. So fun. But yeah, that's all I really have to say about Zelgius, and that's it for this video. So I do hope you enjoyed it today, and that you got an insight as to how all these characters are currently utilized. Please feel free to tell me if you have your own builds that are different to these, and if you love these characters and are excited for their refines, because goodness, it feels so surreal to see distant counter weapons in that little update thing to see that they're getting something, and it's really exciting. So tell me what you think below. Tell me what you think they might do for these refines, whether you think they'll be very basic or overpowered or scary. Tell me what you think, and I'll see you all in the next video. I'm starting to get to the end of university assignments, so I should be able to make more videos in the coming months. So for now, though, I hope you're all okay and well, and I will see you all in the next video. Goodbye for now. Bye.